All right, everyone, to allow for the most amount of time for Tara to speak, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you for joining us for our My Journey seminar this semester. I am Carolina Pineda, and I'm the Research Education Core Program Coordinator down here at the University of Arizona. And I'm going to allow Dr. B a second to introduce herself as well, as she is our core lead. Sorry, I don't mean to throw you on the spot.
Okay, I just had to click my mute button. We're so pleased to have everyone here with us and to have Dr. Chico Jarillo presenting for us and leading this discussion about her journey. And I think I saw a minute ago that we might have our overall principal investigator from NACP on the line as well. But now I can't see. If so many people have joined, I can't see her. Dr. Ashfin, are you here?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm here. Looking forward to Tara's presentation. Thanks for putting this on.
Thank you, Dr. Gachapin, for hopping on. I'm going to take a second to introduce Dr. Tara Chico Jarillo. She's a member of the Tohono O'odham Nation, and she holds a Bachelor of Science in Family Studies and Human Development and a Master's and Doctorate of Public Health in Maternal and Child Health from the U of A. And she will be speaking to us today about grad school, the dissertation process, and her research. So I'm going to allow her to just take it away.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to join you guys today to talk about just what the title says, is my journey to graduate school, my dissertation process, and my research. Oh, my screen isn't moving. Hold on. There we go. So who am I? So like I was introduced, I am a member of the Tohono O'odham Nation. Before I began, I really wanted to kind of share my place. I wanted to share a little about myself personally, because I think it's important for everybody to know who I am. So I was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona, and I was actually born into what could be classified as a biracial family. My mother was born in Brooklyn, New York, and moved to Arizona when she was a teenager, and she is full Irish. And my father was born in Tucson, Arizona, and he is full Tohono O'odham. And so I grew up in this world of being a biracial child, as I remember being called when I was younger, and trying to figure out what that meant. But I have to say, it was very important that my parents felt it was important to immerse my siblings and I in both of our cultures, and to really be proud of where we came from. And so it's through my parents and my family that I really learned the distinctions and sometimes similarities between my mother and my father's culture. So I just feel like I wanted to identify myself and really share that that's where my foundations come from, and that who I am and who we are was very important growing up, and that was how we would learn to navigate the world. And so I also just identify myself not only as an an Irish woman, but a daughter, a sister, an auntie, a wife, and also a mother. So kind of diving right into my experience is I really thought about how would I share my journey, and I found it difficult really to separate my journey as here's my educational, experiences, here's my professional experience, and here's my life experience. It was really hard to talk about those not together, so I put slides together, just kind of pulling out the basics, but really, I guess I'm just going to tell my story. And so we can start with, my foundations are grounded at the University of Arizona. Somehow it was instilled in my siblings and I that we would always go to college. We would always do better than what my parents have done. My father did not have a college education. He worked in the trade world, trades as in like an electrician, and my mother worked in banking and did some college. And so it was always, people asked us the question, well, why did you guys go to college? And I just sometimes think, I don't know, I didn't have a choice. I had to go to college. That's what I was told to do. And so I went to the U of A because of course we could not go to ASU. That was like a no-no. And so my foundations are grounded at the University of Arizona. And I will say, just as an undergrad, I reflect back a lot, and my major changed probably about 3 times. Like, I wanted to go into be a doctor. I wanted to go be a lawyer. I wanted to somehow make this transition into business. And then I wanted to be a nurse. And I held on to nursing for quite some time. And I was ready to apply to nursing school. And then I decided, oh, I don't think I want to do that. So I actually backtracked and thought, well, what am I going to do? And that's kind of where family studies and human development came into my realm. And it really kind of, centered on this idea of how families functions and how you respond to different circumstances. And so I started to immerse myself in that world. You'll see a little thing right there that says my minor is in classics, which kind of comes out from left field. But I did have this, and I don't even know if a lot of people know, I've had this desire in Greek mythology and art and architecture. And so I was able to minor in classics, and I actually finished my minor abroad. I studied abroad in Italy. And so I think that, on a personal side, gave me some independence, and I was able to complete that. So I guess it doesn't necessarily mesh well with where my path has led me, but I wouldn't change that minor at all. And then I worked right after my undergraduate degree. My thoughts were always, what does somebody do, or what do I do with a Bachelor's of Science in Family Studies and Human Development? A lot of people suggested that I should probably go into social services, social work. And I was like, no, I am never going to do that. But I did just that. I got a job on the Tohono O'odham Nation here in Sells, Arizona, in their child welfare division. And I became an investigator. And so I have to say that was probably the hardest job I have ever done. I think my job was to assess and, if needed, remove children from really unfortunate situations, ranging from severe neglect to different types of abuse. And so I reflect back, and that time in my life was a defining moment for me of what I was going to do. Oftentimes I felt like I was putting a Band-Aid on issues that required more skill than I had, and really overall systematic change. And so there was always this focus on these downstream approaches, and I felt myself always trying to look more upstream and how we actually do help these families break these cycles of abuse, addiction. And I also have to say, it wasn't defining because there were so many bad things. I was also able to see some really beautiful things. I was able to see recovery. I was able to see reunification. And I think for me, I always held on to the beautiful things that I saw on that job, because we can all focus on the negative stuff. And I definitely have to say that some of those negative things really drove where I have landed as of right now. But there was beauty in it too. And I think I had to figure out how to manage that. And so that's kind of what drove me to get my master's in public health. I wanted to advance my education and develop leadership skills, more practical experience in helping my community and also other communities. And so that's, I applied to grad school kind of on a whim, to be honest. I quit my job the minute I got accepted. And my parents were kind of like, what are you doing? Because my brother, sister, and I were first generation college students to finish our degrees. So the idea of grad school was never, like, nobody ever talked about grad school in my family. And so it was kind of this, what are you doing? More school? And it wasn't not in a supportive way. I want to stress that, but nobody knew what grad school meant and what did that mean for me. And so like I said, I quit my job when I got accepted to grad school and I started my MPH in 2011. And really over the course of that program, I think I was able to really build skills in research, practical experience. There's all sorts of coursework that you can take. And of course, my focus was on maternal and child health because I was very interested in the family and how we work for families. Within that time, I'm kind of going to go switch to this next slide. That's kind of where a lot of my professional experience started, is as an MPH student. The entire time I worked as a graduate research assistant with Dr. Nicole Yuan. And I worked on some of her projects, and my focus was really on literature reviews, helping her write grants. And she did some work with the Wallapai tribe that I helped transcribe, just learning to transcribe, to interpret focus groups, and that work focused on alcohol use with the Wallapai tribe. And so I did that throughout my undergrad experience, of course, to financially help me get through, master's, to financially help me through my master's, but also for the experience. In 2013, I graduated with my MPH. And again, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And by that time, Dr. Nicolette Teufel-Schoen, who is one of my mentors even now, they just got awarded funds for the Center for American Indian Resilience. And it was a grant between NAU and the U of A. And she hired me on as a research specialist throughout the duration of the grant. And my role changed throughout the duration of the grant. I was a research specialist. I was a co-director of the Community Engagement Corps. I worked in our Research Education and Training Corps. And a lot of the times I was a liaison. My big title was as program coordinator, but I was a liaison between all the corps and helped do some administration things, but also, I coordinated conferences with the team. And so I think for that, it really expanded my skill set on some admin ends, but also gave me experience with working more with the Wallapai tribe through Dr. Teufel-Schoen's work with them. And then, of course, as we know, grants end, right? And so as grants ended, I was able to work with the Mountain West Preparedness and Emergency Response Center. One of the things you'll notice is that my experience is, how do I say? I don't want to say it's random, but it's wide. Here I am saying I worked in emergency preparedness, and but it was specific to tribal communities, and that's where my expertise came in. And again, in that position, I was a liaison. But by that time, I really only spent about a year from undergrad, or from my master's program. I waited about a year and I applied to the DRPH program. And so I guess I never felt like I stopped going to school in that year experience, because I was still in the university. And to be honest, a lot of people just assumed I was still a student. And so I started the DRPH program in the fall of 2014. With very high hopes that I would finish this degree in no time. but I also continued to work full time. I was fortunate to have support in my MPH program, but to be honest, it wasn't enough. So I did take out some loans when I was in my MPH program. So I was determined not to do that as in my doctoral program. So I chose to work full time the entire time I pursued my DRPH. So that's where I continued to work with the Mountain West Pearl. When that grant ended, I had the opportunity to work for the Center for Indigenous Environmental Health Research. And that was a really short time, because then I started looking for positions outside of the university, and I landed, as you see in the very right-hand corner, I landed at 0 to 3, which is a nonprofit based out of Washington, DC, that focuses on the 0 to 3 population. My primary job worked with a program called Programmatic Assistance for Tribal Home Visiting. And my team, we provided technical assistance to home visiting programs, tribal home visiting programs across the nation. So I worked with several tribes across the nation. Specifically, I worked with the Intertribal Council of Michigan, and was able to provide some assistance to them on how to implement their programs. I have to say, Michigan team was amazing. And so they really didn't need a lot of TA, and they actually taught me more than they needed from me. But that was a fantastic experience, kind of dabbling into really more of my interest, which was maternal and child health. And so I worked there until I started my position here as interim executive director of the Tohono O'odham Nation Department of Health and Human Services. So kind of backtracking us, I hope I'm not too confusing, bringing us back and forth, but so I did my coursework. I started my coursework for my DRPH part-time because I was working full-time. I will say that I got married in that time. I also had a baby, and he was 10 weeks old when I took my comprehensive exams. And then I kind of have to say I floated a little bit for that year. Working on my dissertation proposal. I'm going to go back to this slide because I want to jump into here so my dissertation process. So of course there's required coursework. There's these comprehensive exams. It's different for everybody. It's different for every college, but at my time, comprehensive exams, from my understanding in the College of Public Health, have changed since I took them. But we had our comprehensive exams. They were 2 days of written exams, and then you had a day of oral exams. But you had to pass your written exams before you could take your oral exam. And so fortunately, I was able to do that with a cadre of individuals that I went to school with. So we were able to study together, and we really had support there. And so then I took my comps, and to be honest, I didn't think my comps were easy. I feel like it was maybe a pretty stressful time, but I also reflect back, and again, I was postpartum. I had a 10-week-old baby, but somehow I survived, and I passed my comprehensive exams, and I started my dissertation proposal. And that is, kind of what it says. You're writing a dissertation proposal, but no experience is one and the same. And I thought, as I was doing, going to talk about this presentation, that my experience is quite different, because I wrote one dissertation proposal, which was going to focus on cancer, the adaptation of cancer prevention projects that are funded under the CDC, and really exploring this concept of adaptation with that cancer emphasis. Dr. Julie Arman helped me kind of work to develop that, and we actually were able to go to the CDC and talk about this. But after lots of discussion and lots of talking, and I even the college calls it defending your proposal and getting it approved. My proposal fell through. And I had to start over. At that moment, it was devastating to me, to be very honest, is I have to start over. What am I going to do? I am this far in this program, and now I have to start over. And in full transparency, there were moments during that time where I thought, should I finish? And I think that's, I had lots of conversations with myself about finishing, but also lots of conversations with my mentors, my family, and everybody saying, you're this close, like you are this close, like let's figure it out. And truly, I think I proceeded because of the support of my committee. And really trying to help me brainstorm how I can stay true to the underlying purpose of what I wanted to do in my dissertation, but finding another outlet to do that. And I was very fortunate that Dr. Yuan, who was on my dissertation, had gotten funded for an FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and alcohol exposed pregnancy funding. Was foundation funding to work with the Tucson Indian Center. And so I jumped on board as a graduate assistant, but in the way of the world works, I was able to develop a new dissertation proposal. And so I developed a new dissertation proposal. I defended my dissertation proposal, and I started my dissertation work. And so I think just reflection on that as myself is, I don't know that happens to a lot of students. And if it does, I never heard of anybody who had to redo their entire proposal. And so I did, and I came out on the other side. And then there's your dissertation research. Mine wasn't necessarily considered research per se. My project really focused on like process and adaptation process, but I was also able to get a data set and do some analysis for that data set. And I think for me that was, they all came together and they were all under the umbrella of FASDs and AEPs. But I also think they expanded outside of that. And in my next couple of slides, I'll really dive into my dissertation. So of course you have your research and then you have your writing. I think I was very fortunate to have lots of friends and colleagues who before me who were writing their dissertations and finished not too long as I was just ready to start. And so I was able to learn some tricks of the trade and really how you should write your dissertation and how you get that done. And so I was really fortunate during the writing phase of this process to have continued support from all of my colleagues, but also their lessons learned were really helpful in that process. And then of course my dissertation defense, which I have to say at the end of the day, that was the easiest part for me. You know your work. Nobody else knows your work besides your committee. And so it was easy. Maybe easy is not the word, but it wasn't hard to present my dissertation and meet with my committee and defend. So diving into my dissertation, just so everybody can kind of get an idea of what I did is, so there were 3 phases to my dissertation. This is probably really small for you to see, but what I did is I took pictures of a report that I wrote for the Tucson Indian Center. So my project really focused on, the first one was a scoping review. I think that FASD and alcohol exposed pregnancies is taboo to talk about in Native communities. And so we were really looking to see what programs have been used to specifically prevent FASD and AEPs in American Indian communities. Also specifically with urban communities, because I was directly working with the Tucson Indian Center on my third aim. And so we really wanted to focus on what are we doing for urban American Indians, not just reservation-based or rural American Indians. And so that was my first one, was really diving into the literature. My second aim was to understand factors that were associated with AEPs and FASD. And so the background was in Dr. Yuan's bigger FASD project, her and our team, we collected data from urban Indians. They weren't necessarily members from the Tucson Indian Center, because we were able to attend events to get a broader reach of urban American Indians, about factors like their alcohol use, their general alcohol use during pregnancy, their access to health care, where they live. Do they live in the rural areas? Do they live in urban areas? Knowledge about FASD. So with the Tucson Indian Center's permission, I was able to use some of the data and do some not too heavy stats. There were some, and really try to see where we could focus our efforts in terms of which age groups. And the age groups we looked at were 18 and older, just because of the IRB, and we didn't do any youth surveys. So it was young adults, and elders. I have to say we got a lot of elders that completed the survey, and you think, what's the value in elders who maybe aren't of childbearing age? But the value was that elders are being incorporated in a lot of programming. And so if we know their perception of alcohol use and their knowledge, how can we use them to be maybe agents of change in our programming with younger individuals? And then this third process is where I really stayed true for my previous dissertation, as I've always been interested in this idea of adaptation. And why do we adapt? Should we adapt? How effective are adapting programs? And so the Indian Center had said, well, we don't really, the goal of the bigger project outside of my dissertation was to adapt a program. And they said, well, we don't know how to do that. How do we do that? And so my third aim focused on the exploration of their process and how do they adapt their programs to meet their needs. They serve over 30 they serve individuals from over 30 tribal nations. So how do you meet those needs? Yes, they predominantly, because of where they're at, we're in Southwest, Arizona, they serve predominantly Pasco Yaqui, Tohono O'odham, Navajo, but they also served out from nations outside of where we come, the state of Arizona. And so that was my third aim. And it really, again, just focused on this adaptation process. So with the Tucson Indian Center, I feel like the third aim was the most important, and I think had this big, aha moment for me, I guess, as we defined their definition, because I think in order for us to talk about adaptation, we needed to define what adaptation meant to them. Oftentimes, they sometimes felt that adaptation is it's an academic word. So how would they define adaptation? And so with their health staff, because their health staff is who I was working with, we defined adaptation using like a concept map at where everybody put their definitions down, and then we worked together to come up with one definition. And so their definition was, was to modify. They used a lot of modifying and changing their existing programs and modes of communication. And they really wanted to add supplemental documentation, because they often find that they're always changing flyers, they're changing announcements to make them more applicable to their clients. And so we added those in, and that's the definition we used when we started talking about the next part of the project. And the next part of that was to define their process. And they kept telling me, well, we do this, which I knew they did, is we do this. We've just never really talked about it. We're always changing, modifying, adapting things. And so we really tried to break down that process, and we were able to come up with this, their process as being simple. And I say simple visually, but really when you try to break down what this means, I think it can be very complex. And I think adaptation can be, it's something they just do. It's not something that they have to think about, and I think a lot of their feedback was, well, why do we have to document this? We already do it. And so it started with community co-powerment. And co-powerment is a term that I was actually introduced by one of my colleagues. And it's really this idea that the word empowerment can kind of mean that, have somewhat of a negative connotation. And so when we use co-powerment, is that it's an equal opportunity for both the community and then also for the staff. And so there's this equal sharing of knowledge and being open to everybody's knowledge. So the Indian Center staff agreed that we would call it community co-powerment. Community feedback. So of course, they're always getting feedback from their community members, whether it's formal or informal, and then reflection. And so we spent a lot of time together breaking those down, and also you see that we have culture outside of this. And one of the things they said is culture is not a step. It's not a step in the process. Culture is consistently always there and consistently on our minds. And so we don't have to step back and think, oh, we got to make sure culture is there. Culture is always. And so they really wanted to surround their process with culture. And so really, I think at the end of my dissertation, there were these best practices. And I have to say, these best practices aren't necessarily new. They're not a new concept, but they were best practices in what I felt were really important to pull out and working with them, as they leverage partnerships to get a lot of their work done. They are huge proponents, and the Tucson Indian Center are huge proponents of community engagement. They utilize a culturally centered approach. So that, again, notion of culture. And then they also utilize multi-generational approaches. And so I have to say, it wasn't necessarily a struggle, but it was really how did the research team step out and realize we weren't always just going to focus on one age group. We were always going to focus on a multi-generational group. And how do we incorporate that into the programming? And I really think that was important to pull out, because as Native people, our communities, like this says, are, we promote social cohesion and we function together as a whole rather than an individual. And so that's really important to add when we're thinking about how we're going to adapt these programs. And then, of course, there were lessons learned out of my dissertation. As I said, adaptation was not a new concept. They are constantly adapting, and they always have adapted. Their process was simple. Again, it was really 3 main steps. The idea that the process is cyclical. Sometimes we want to see that there's a beginning and an end, but for them, the process never stopped. It was a constant feedback loop and ongoing, and you can either go back or go forward when you needed to. Of course, the use of a cultural lens was always essential to them. And then skipping down to number 6, it was really gaining community trust and acceptance. But for me, I think if I think of my dissertation and I think of the one thing where it was just like, aha, was kind of the use of what we call just-in-time adaptation. The concept came to me when they were talking about it, because we do just-in-time training, and at least I learned about just-in-time training in my emergency preparedness work. Is we have a disaster and you got to just-in-time train people. And so for this concept, it was, oh, we got a new program, we have to just change it. They are changing in their sessions. They're changing, okay, this is what we were taught to do, and this is how the curriculum says to do it. But how does it work for you? This is how it works for me. And it's just this ongoing discussion. And so they're doing adaptation in the moment. And it won't necessarily be documented if somebody were to pull up and start using that curriculum again. And so that was really, I think, important, because I don't think we talk about that enough. I don't think just-in-time adaptation is new, but I don't think we've ever given credit, we as in maybe academics or research, have given credit to the just-in-time adaptations that a lot of communities are doing that aren't necessarily documented, and giving credit to them that they are adapting in the moment because they're trying to find things that work for their communities. And so that was a really big takeaway from my dissertation. So kind of moving back, I mean, I could talk about my dissertation forever. I still feel like I know it in the back of my head, but I think in terms of like those who are joining the call, for me, what were my lessons learned out of my dissertation? Timeline. I'm sure we've all seen this photo before. When I started the DRPH program, I saw this linear line and it was just going to go up and I was going to be done. And the reality of it wasn't. Like in my story, I had ups and downs. And I'm only post 5 months of finishing school, but in my time I've had to reflect is I don't think I would change those ups and downs, because that process and that time is mine and it's my journey. And it wasn't easy. Like there is no doubt that, some of those lower peaks were really hard and really challenging. As next to that is also just this notion of, imposter syndrome. I struggled a lot with a lot of self-doubt. I found this image and it was really, I thought, oh yeah, I remember feeling those way. Attributing my success to other things. I shouldn't be here, but I'm here because somebody was my friend, or, sometimes even it was because I was Native and that's why I'm here. And not really giving credit to my skill and my experience. And I just feel like that's something that I even battle now in my professional life, but I've definitely made some transitions to kind of really, steer away from the imposter syndrome, because I am here because of what I've done. But also with that, I think of these two things is you've got community, you've got friends, and then you've got people like Maya Angelou. When we talk about, imposter syndrome, who said, I wrote 11 books, but I was worried that people were going to realize I was running a game on everyone. And I think that's sometimes how I felt. But my community, my friends, my family, my partner, he has been here for the ride in all of my grad school. Even my son were just really there to help me get through this process. And I don't know that I would have gotten here without them. I think that whatever your community is, you build it and hold on to it, because that's part of your strength and that's going to get you through. And then I always think you have to remember your why. Why am I here? And why am I doing what I'm doing? And I personally felt like in those moments of, oh my God, am I going to be able to do this? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? I always had to go back to, why am I here? And I've always thought I am here in my academic and my professional life because of my passion for my people and my passion to help. I go back to the defining moments with my child welfare days. And I didn't say this previously, but the defining moment, I can name it, was not just the couple years that I worked there, but it was my first day on the job and there was a child loss. And that really defined that was the moment. And it's guided me here. Dr. Tufel-Schoen, I don't know if she remembers this because I see her on the call, is in my MPH program. She asked me, what do you want to do? You know, there's that question. What do you want to do when you're done with all of this? And I just kind of thought, oh God, I don't know. But I remember telling her, I don't know, maybe I want to be the director of health for my tribe, and kind of chuckled about it. And maybe I was manifesting back then, because in a surprising twist of how life comes at you in good ways is at the end of my doctorate degree, I was approached by tribal leadership and asked if I would be willing to be appointed as the director of health and human services. And I accepted after some thought. That was, you know, it was a big jump, but I accepted, and I'm here, and I'm currently, you know, it's a big job. It has its challenges, you know, but I have always thought about systematic changes and how we can better the health of our community. And I have hit the ground running, and I wouldn't change that experience for anything. So that's really all I have. I know we're at about 12:45. I'm sure I could talk about my experience so much more. But I want to give everybody an opportunity, if you have, to ask me any questions. And I just really appreciate the space to share who I am and my journey that has led me here.
Thank you, Dr. Chico Jarillo. We will start Q&A in just 2 minutes. Before we start Q&A, we would like to talk about our getting some feedback from those who attended my journey. So Lori, if you could jump on and explain our evaluation process, that would be lovely.
Hello. My name is Lori, and can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm like, wait. My name is Lori, and I'm an evaluator for the project. I have a evaluation link that I'm gonna add in the chat here. It's completely anonymous, and it just helps us understand how this talk today has helped your understanding, and it helps make NACP a little bit better. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop that link in the chat here. It takes about 5 minutes or less to fill out. So I appreciate you doing that. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Lori. Now we can open up for Q&A. Feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand, and we can call on you, or throw it in the chat. I can throw it to Tara. I'm sure she's looking at it. Thank you for those who already offered great feedback to the presentation.
Hi, Tara. This is Francine Gachapin. Thank you so much for an excellent presentation and for your perseverance to overcome all the challenges that you shared with us. And so my question is, based on, now you're in a tribal position, which I think is the goal of so many of our Native students, right? You go to school so you can come back to benefit your community. What can you share with other students on board in terms of how and what they should be kind of really concentrating on to help them in this transition, and how best to utilize academic training within a community setting?
That's a big question. Let me make sure I'm understanding. So how they could essentially come and work for their tribes with their academic training, is that the overall question?
That would be, yes, because
Okay.
I think sometimes there can be a wide gap there in terms of the expectations of the community and just where the community is at. And you're coming in with these really good ideas and your skill sets, and they may not always be kind of in a good cohesive place. And so
Mhm.
any kind of tips you can share, I think would be appreciated.
You know, in terms of the tips I can share, I mean, you are right. We talk about community readiness all the time. We talk about community readiness in academics and research all the time. And to me, I always saw that as a tension. Well, we want to do this, but it's a community ready to do this. And one thing that I have learned, and I just think this could, it, at least for me, it gives me some resolve, is that there's like this dual role, especially now, right now, as I'm in leadership here with my tribe. I'm also a community member. And I also work in this system that can be pretty heavy sometimes. And is like, I am not necessarily here to tell the community what they need. And that's never been my role, essentially. I truly believe that communities know what they need. I truly believe communities know where their attention needs to focus. But I think sometimes the issue is that communities don't know how to address what they need. And I think that's where the innovation and the training and the research experience that we have can help them facilitate that. I really feel like I'm a facilitator rather than somebody who's telling them this is how you do it. Because they know, we say this all the time, the community is the expert, and they are the experts. But sometimes I think that we need, or they need, that we need this extra push to really think outside the box. Is, you know what you need. So how do we get you what we need? And really using them and their skill and their knowledge to help you get there. And I think that's been really helpful for me. It's also been really helpful for me to step back, because I get excited about doing certain things and let's do this and let's do that. But to have to step back and say, okay, is this what you really need? And if it does, how do we get there? So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, great. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'll ask a quick question. Hey, Tara, sorry I missed so much of your presentation. This is Jenny. I was on another call. It's good to see you. I was wondering, given your previous position with PATH and having, having access to the federal government policy type of information, like how do you see that transition to working for the tribe and like having a policy lens for like broader changes? Has that helped you in any way in your work? Yeah.
That's a really good question. We always have the federal government up here, to be honest. That's how I feel sometimes. When I worked in my previous position with PATH, like I was a contractor with the federal government through 0 to 3. So I had to do what the federal government said. And I remember sometimes being frustrated as, how come my grantees, like, how come they can't meet these performance measures, and trying to figure it out and not getting the answers I wanted because I was a contractor with the feds, right? They don't want to say, well, the feds don't understand. And on the flip side, now, the tribal health department here, we function at over like 50 budgets, which include tribal budgets, federal budgets. So we're moving all of these different directions, and I see the struggle. I see the struggle with federal regulations and working with tribal grants, federal timelines, tribal timelines. I really don't feel that a lot of people outside of our world possibly really understand the tribal process. It is not easy. We are not one and the same. How my tribe does it could be very different than how other tribes do it. And so I just, I don't know if I'm answering your question, Jenny, but I saw like it was like a complete, 180 from where I was working as a federal contractor to where I am now. And there's a really big disconnect there. I don't have a solution, but believe me, I'm trying to figure out those solutions, but I see where the struggle is.
Thank you. I think you're also in a really awesome position to be heard at policy level, whether that's tribal or state. So that really helps out tribal nations in itself. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny.
I have a question. How can students better prepare themselves to work in tribal communities or like at a tribal health department? Are there like any maybe courses you feel like could have been added to like either the MPH or PhD level work, or what else? What do you feel like could have been done to better prepare for that? That's a hard, I don't know. I feel like every question you guys are asking me, it's hard. I don't know. Like, I don't know if I said this, but I didn't go straight to my MPH. I did not. I worked for my community. And I think that was really helpful. Like, that was like my really first real world job experience. So I came into the graduate program with a little lived experience, and I truly think that's really helpful, especially in public health. Like, I just feel like in public health, we're at least in our training, it's community-based. We work with communities. We want to, the DRPH is really putting your research skills into practice. But it was really that one-on-one in-person community experience. I wish there was more opportunity when I was in, my MPH, and to be honest, in my undergrad too. I did not have like practical practice experience in my undergrad. Now I feel like when I really look at when I graduated from undergrad, it's not like it was 5 years ago, it was a long time ago. And that might've changed just in terms of my programming. But I do feel like, with the College of Public Health, we do have those, they're 1 week service learning, but I do think we could afford more practice experience.
I actually have a follow-up question to that question. Do you feel like possibly even having mentorship within your tribe before you entered? I know you did some work between your master's and your undergraduate, but like just having a little bit more mentorship from, say, like a tribal member who used to be in your position, or someone of that sorts.
I mean, it could be helpful. I can't really say that I had specific tribal mentors that were in my position before. Reflecting on my little PowerPoint here, one thing I forgot to mention is like mentorship is huge. Each of my mentors were, I just don't know what I would have done without them. And so I've had mentors, work mentors. But I think it could help if you had tribal mentors. I mean, now that I'm in my position, there are mentors who I have met were in my previous position who have been really helpful in understanding some things that I'm not, I'm still learning and I'm not quite sure about.
Thank you. Anyone else? I think we have 5 more minutes.
I could rave, and I'm totally biased, but I think it's actually amazing that you also admit that you're still on a learning process. And I think a lot of tribal communities really appreciate that we realize that we left the res to learn skills, but that at the same time, we're still relearning our cultural pieces, which are really way up here, and what we have, we're just hoping can help. So I just think that's such a huge, amazing thing about you, is that you recognize that. So thank you for saying that.
Thanks, Jenny.
I have a quick question. This is Nikki Tufelschoen. Tara, I would think could you talk a little bit about professional networking and whether you felt like that was a part of your journey? Could you sort of talk about that as students think about whether they should join associations? Should they get themselves in situations outside of their own, university settings?
Yes. I can't say I'm like the best professional network. I'm really upfront in addressing where I could have improved. But it only takes joining one professional network, one group, one board, to meet one person who can guide you. And I think that for me, I'm actually like a super introverted person. So I'm not one to just go up to people and connect. That's actually really hard for me, but I truly believe it just takes one. Now, should you go do more? Yes, I was looking at my resume because I have to give it to the tribe, an updated one. And I thought, oh, wow, I was involved in more things, but that came with time. I know we likely don't have undergrads on here, but one of the things as an undergrad, I didn't network with anybody. I just went to school and I finished. I joined ASUA, which is the student leadership, and I worked on the spring fling. But I didn't talk to my professors. I didn't, unless I had to. And fortunately, I really didn't have to. But I do think we should get more opportunity to do that. Because when I went to apply to grad school the first time, I thought, how am I going to get a letter of reference from one of my teachers? Because I didn't network. They don't know who I am. I was just a name in these big classes. But again, I cannot stress enough that, Nikki, I think that it could just take one group to get your name out there.
Great, thank you.
We have enough time for one more question if anyone else wants to hop in, or we can end here and say thank you. Give 30 seconds.
This isn't a question, but this is Francine again. Just want to thank Tara again for today and for being such a wonderful role model. I think that's really great that you are an inspiration to so many students who do question, just like you did, is this worth doing? Am I doing the right thing? How is this going to fit with what I want to be doing? So thank you for being that role model for everybody. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for being here. This was wonderful to hear about your journey. You mentioned something about it maybe being meandering, but I think every experience you had was valuable and you use it now. So it's very cool.
Thank you.
Yes, and I can echo that. I appreciate the conversation you basically stirred up in me, just being outside of my undergraduate, but working professionally. And I'm like, there will be a time when I need to come back to school. And it's so encouraging to like hear from someone else who's actually gone a similar route.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to end it here for joining us for my journey. Thank you again, Tara, for speaking to us and just sharing everything that's special about you. And I will say goodbye to everyone. Thank you.
Bye.